Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Burch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast and another special bonus episode brought to you by our friends at TCA, True Change Alliance. Today, you get to hear from a first-generation Latina, Dr. Brenda Galvez. She believes that education is important for all social and economic mobility, and in this conversation, she tells the story of her family and how she got to the States and where she came from. What was it like to transition as a 12-year-old young girl in the States for the first time not speaking English? What was it like as she proved to her family that their sacrifices were more than worth it as she worked and got her doctorate? And what tips can you, as educators, as community members, as singers, as administrators, use from Dr. Galvez's experience to really impact those Latinx in your classes? We also get a really fantastic definition of some really important words, so stick around to the end. This is one of those wonderful, vulnerable learning experience conversations that I can't thank Dr. Galvez for enough. I sincerely hope you enjoy this special TCA D.A.R.E episode with Dr. Brenda Galvez. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are welcoming Dr. Brenda Galvez. Hello, Dr. Galvez.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am thrilled to meet you. This is one of our TCA, True Change Alliance bonus series, and I am thrilled to be having you in this space. Tell the listener, who is Dr. Galvez?
So I am a recent graduate of UCLA in the Educational Leadership Program. I am a first-gen Latina, not born, but raised till I was 12 years old in Mexico by my grandmother, while my parents were farm workers. So I took the American dream when it comes to education very seriously, and I am now part of the 0.2% of Latinas who hold a doctorate degree. I have a 2-year-old daughter. Her name is Audrey. And when I'm not being a full-time mommy, I do run my own business. It's called Latina Hustle LLC. And we focus a lot on social justice issues when it comes to being a Latinx in a white supremacy society, especially a white Latina, and what that means in our society today. But besides the serious stuff, we sell handmade jewelry.
Really? Okay, we'll have to talk about that later because that's amazing. But in the serious stuff, when your family worked on a farm, when your parents were traveling farm workers, what was that like for you to be raised by your grandma, to be in Mexico, and when did you make the transition into the States?
So it was actually a very beautiful experience. My grandmother, her generation, had a long line of musicians, and my family moved to Mexicali, Baja California, Mexico, which is by the border on California, bordering California and Arizona, because apparently that's where the big record deals labels were. And so her family wanted to get a record deal, and they moved from Sinaloa to Mexicali. But as time moved on, obviously they had to make money. So they focused more on working on the fields, which was, American dollars, and then going to Mexico, it meant it was a big change. So it really changed their lifestyle. But when it came to my mom's generation, they were actually forced to work. So my mom and my uncles and my aunts were forced by my grandpa to drop out of school and actually pursue a life, being agricultural workers. So they traveled every 3 months all over California. And because of that, my sister and I had to be left with my grandmother, my nana. And she was amazing. Like, she was a catechism teacher. So a lot of Mexicans, we grow up very devout Catholics. That Catholic guilt is still very in me. So I guess she did a good job. But she also was in choir. She had a beautiful singing voice. And even though they never actually pursued anything seriously after my grandmother, after her generation, music was still a big part of my family, along with craftsmanship. So they made a lot of jewelry, they sewed a lot just to make a little bit of extra income. So a lot of the artistic creative side ran very, very deep in my family. But it was beautiful. It was a wonderful experience I would never change.
That is
And
so,
I
the
guess,
history is beautiful. Keep going.
yeah, to answer the second part of your question, my mother left the fields when I was about 10 years old. She remarried, but it took her a while for her to transition into living here in the US. And then when she was finally settled and she had remarried, that's when she brought my sister and I here, which was a little traumatic just because of the culture shock. It was completely different. And around that time, like in the mid 1990s, there was regulation in California where it was banned for public schools to teach in Spanish. So everything had to be taught in English if you were receiving federal and or state funding. So not only were we removed from our everyday routine, from our loved ones that we grew up with, but we also had to struggle with just learning the new culture when it came to school and not even being able to communicate. So we didn't speak the language. It was very hard to make friends. It took my sister and I a while to get acclimated or assimilated, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
to the American lifestyle.
So you didn't speak English prior to coming into California. And
No,
how old were you? So you were 10ish when your mom left the fields. How old were you when you made the transition?
12.
Oh my goodness, that's such a traumatic time anyway for a
Yeah, it
girl.
yeah, and it's so funny because I came here when I was in middle school. And that's when you really start moving around your campus. And in Mexico is the opposite. In Mexico, when you're in middle school, you are assigned a classroom. Your cohort gets assigned a classroom, and the teachers are the one who move around.
Really?
So the students just stay in one class, and the teachers are the ones who move around based on the day's schedule. So when I came here, I'm sitting in first period, like, where is everybody going? Like, what happens? Like, why isn't the teacher moving? And one teacher that actually helped me a lot, it was, I forgot her name, but it was this African American woman, and she was my choir teacher.
Yes,
And
she was. Of course she was. Go choir teachers.
and and she really helped me not, I guess, communicate in a different way. And it's so crazy how music just, it keeps coming up. And I feel it's like a universal language in a way as well, because it's a way for people to bond, and communicate without really having to speak one language or another. Um, it's not so much about the words themselves, but more of the sound and how you carry that sound that really unites people. And I think because of that class, it was a little bit easier for me to transition when I was in middle school here.
So, just I know we're going to talk about your research, but my heart, like I have goosebumps thinking about the fact that choir was what helped you through that transition. We did not talk about that before this little conversation. That came out organically. But then also the fact that you came to the States at 12, not even speaking the language, and you have a doctorate now.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was, coming, and I'm sure a lot of people who have immigrant parents and or grandparents can relate, but they give up and they sacrifice a lot. So there's this like first generation guilt that you have to not only fulfill your own dreams, but the dreams of your parents and your grandparents. So you never want to let them down. And you see the sacrifice, you see that sparkle in their eyes when you get an award, when you graduate from high school, that just really keeps you going and motivates you to do everything and more that they ever could ever dream of. So I think that was the primary motivator, just being able to show my family that what they sacrificed was not in vain, that, you know, I was able to make something out of it.
I love that you're giving us not just the experience of what was going on between the differences in cultures and the underlying turmoil as you transitioned, but also the importance of family and the different types, like you've said, the different types of guilt. And I've never thought about it as guilt before. That is, it's changing my perspective on some things. I'm looking forward to listening to this episode again and really thinking of how this can impact. What a perfect segue into your research. Now, I have Dr. Hyman's version of your research. He gave me like a little a blurb, and his blurb said she does a lot with visual and performing arts majors and how to make sure everyone has access and that it's a diverse population. She'll tell you all about it. You're going to love it. So tell us about your research and what can you tell us and how can we take what you've studied and really impact our singers and our students?
So my research was the academic perceptions of vision performing arts transfer students. And it all started when I was first hired at UCLA. It was straight out of my master's program. And the only department that would give me an interview back in 2011 was the music department at UCLA. And it was pretty much the only department that took a shot and said, you know what, we're going to give this girl a try. I was there for about 8 years. So I worked my way from being student services support assistant to being associate director of advising and scholarships. And what I noticed a lot was that although UCLA was a huge research institution that a lot of people think that, you know, it can do no wrong, music students were not being served, specifically transfer students. And the reason for this was that even though UCLA had a lot of resources, music was just never really a priority. And I guess to give you an example, what would be, and I think this is very common in top tier research institutions, just because we don't associate research with visual and performing arts. But one example would be the Career Center. Music students can go to the Career Center and see a generalist counselor and say, can you look at my repertoire and tell me if I'm ready for grad school or for an audition? Or can you help me with this piece that I'm working on for an audition for this scholarship or this composition for a scholarship? So all of our students would just come to student services and try to fill in that gap. Now, as an administrator who doesn't come from music, I wasn't able to fill that gap either. So what I started working on was creating programming that really targeted those gaps in order to provide necessary resources to our students. So one example would be, I started the career series at UCLA that gave workshops on not only workshops, but field trips to the Grammy Museum, to Capitol Records, helped with the internship program for music industry in order to provide our students that support. Now, narrowing it down even further, transfer students. It's one thing to be a music student at a top tier research institution, and another one to be a transfer student at a top tier institution, because a lot of transfer students are non-traditional. They come from underserved communities. And just the word non-traditional, I don't like, because it makes it sound like you don't belong. You're not in the tradition of coming straight out of high school, which already is in itself, it just excludes our students. But a lot of our transfer students were students of color, and already pretty much a lot of things working against them, and then coming to this huge institution and in a major that has been historically racist, mm-hmm. Especially if you're looking at classical, then that's when it became even more evident for me that there needed to be more focus. There needed to be a bigger lens for this student population. And even if you try to research articles or books on transfer students or visual and performing arts and community colleges, there's not that much out there. So I literally had to start from scratch. I think the most the article that I found that aligned the most with what I was looking for, which was articulation, was written in 1972.
Holy smokes, that's almost as bad as the copyright laws we're working off of. Jeez.
So my I really wanted to focus on more of the systemic processes and the bureaucracy behind transferring as a music student from a community college to a four-year institution, because music can be very subjective. So it's not like STEM where you get grades, where you take standardized exams. Mm-hmm. Music is, you can audition for one person and it could be perceived a certain way versus another professor who can perceive it a totally different way. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very objective. And a lot of our students, even though they were coming in as junior standing when it came to units, when they were done with their audition, their faculty members would say, well, you know, even though your units say you're junior standing, your voice says you're more of a sophomore level. So you're not really gonna be here for 2 years, you're gonna be here more like 3 or 4, which for a transfer student who's already in their mid-20s, you know, and they've been at a community college for 3 to 6 years, it's like, well, then
why do I have longer?
Right. And like, not only that, but I have other responsibilities. Some of them have kids. Some of them have tours already that they have to, you know, fulfill. And once I started my research, a lot of just racial inequities started to come up organically. And it really took a turn to, it's bigger than just the system and the articulation and the audition process. It's a way bigger monster than I could have ever even tried to tackle.
Does this play out in your Latina Hustle LLC?
It's so funny because I literally just wanted to make jewelry, but I can't, once you see it, like you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. And as I had mentioned, as a white Latina, I come from privilege. So I benefit from a white supremacist society, whether I want to admit it or not. And even though I'm very proud of my culture and my upbringing, my race is my race, and the way people perceive me is one way versus the way I identify myself. And yes, it definitely plays out in Latina Hustle. And my sister and I talk about it and how we begin to see the privileges that come with being a white Latina and how those play out in everyday aspects of our lives.
So for someone listening, because this is a lot of good conversation here and a lot of things just to think about, even if there aren't specific answers. Let's go back to the very beginning, knowing what you know about your research and how it's actually a bigger thing than just the articulation. If we go back to when you moved into the States, let's go from 12 to where we are now. What are some tips that we could give the listeners for creating a space that will help in the transition? What are some things that we as educators, as administrators, as other members of choirs or musical communities, how can we support our transitioning students from other cultures such as yours?
I think it was difficult finding a safe space, for sure. There were a lot of barriers when it came to language, when it came to culture. And I think being able to find that safe space and knowing that being different is not bad is extremely critical for a child to thrive. I remember being in Mexico, and when I was in school, I was very extroverted. I had a lot of friends. I loved going up in class and teach and dance. And coming here, you're already in your preteens, you're already very self-conscious and you're trying to figure out who you are. And on top of that, everything that was going on with the transition and not being able to find a safe space right away just made me go into this shell where I didn't know how to talk to people. I was embarrassed. And the other thing was, even when I did try to communicate and people making fun of your accent, like, oh, like what is she trying to say? Like she sounds funny and I think, like I said, the safe space that I found was the choir because when you're singing, people can't really tell your accent. Breathing exercises, warming up your your throat exercises, or I remember my teacher would make us get a candle and sing and say, make sure that your candle doesn't blow out because if it is, you're not singing through your diaphragm, kind of thing. And that's, everybody kind of understood that. Mm-hmm. So I think for administrators and teachers and just people who are in positions where they can, creating a safe space for students is extremely, extremely critical for them to thrive.
What about choosing music in your tongue? Like if I would have been your music teacher and I would have asked, what are your favorite songs that you sang growing up? Would that have been good, bad, why not? What are some thoughts on repertoire and songs we could have selected to make you feel a bigger part of the picture as a whole?
Mexico is actually, I remember growing up and listening to Plácido Domingo, listening to Rocío Dúrcal, who was a very big Spanish singer who was huge in Mexico. There was a lot of classical music song that it was highlighted in Mexico. And I remember going to, I don't remember if it was, I think it was probably undergrad, and they had Plácido Domingo playing somewhere. And I was like, oh, that, like, I grew up listening to him. And people being surprised, like, what do you mean? But other than classical, I mean, yeah, for sure. If people, even working at UCLA, I had a lot of music faculty who would try to make a connection that way, right? Because they would learn from so many types of music, from so many different types of instruments, that it was a common language where you can be like, oh, I totally know that singer. But for sure mariachi, um, and knowing the roots of where that came from. So it's not only bringing up, oh, I know the singer, but also trying to understand, like, what does that mean historically? Where did it come from? Or like, if you don't know, like, oh, do you know like the background of it? Really try to engage students to talk about who they are, because then it brings you into a place where it's like, wow, they're actually really interested in knowing who I am.
So this is lots of good ideas. Would it be good or bad to ask you to help with a piece that's in Spanish?
I think mm, I think it would be up to the student and the faculty. I mean, because there's different levels of working relationships that you have with music faculty, right? Like, one, you can have a professor where you're learning about the history of jazz versus you have your private instructor. And your private instructor is literally your mentor, is the person who's going to walk with you through this journey since you step on campus, and sometimes even before. So a lot of our students already had private lessons with our instructors before they had even thought about applying to UCLA. So it would really depend on the dynamic of the relationship. Obviously, it kind of reminds me of having talks about, you know, very deep subjects where you don't want to put the emotional labor on a student and when you could have done the research yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, at least to me, music can be like that. It can be very personal, can be very intimate, and it really, but it can be used as a great tool to help create a safe space.
So making sure maybe that you talk to that student outside before just putting them on the spot.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Yes, definitely.
Good tips. All right, I have another one. Are you sure you don't mind all these questions? This is fun.
I'll try to answer to the best of my ability, but I don't mind.
This is awesome. When did you transition between finding your space and being happy and really being proud of your heritage? When did that transition happen? When did you really realize that you could take ownership of that, especially because you talk about it with your sister?
Last year, which is crazy.
That is
Yeah, it's
crazy.
crazy because I think because of COVID, it really slowed things down, and it really, and again, saying that things slowed down also comes from a place of privilege. Not a lot of people had that privilege, but using that time to really get to know the history behind my family, getting to know just myself, things that I like, things that I love. And the year before COVID, so the last year for my doctoral program, I I was being a full-time mommy, full-time employee, and full-time student. So I had to give something up. And obviously I couldn't give up being a mommy, and I was almost done with my doctorate. So I had to leave my full-time job to really focus on my doctorate and just focusing on spending more intentional time with my daughter. And it really, once I was outside of my full-time job, it it put things into perspective in terms of really going back and thinking, wait, what did that process really mean for our students of color? Or was I really helping, or was I being part of this system that creates unnecessary barriers for students? And then that translated into, wait a minute, like, so what am I doing with my friendships? What am I doing with my relationships? What am I doing with my relationship with myself? How am I taking care of myself? And a lot of self-education brought a lot of these things forward. And even today, my sister and I continually talk about how race, you know, culture, language, because those are three things that people use interchangeably when they're not. So, how those identities come together and make us who we are, and then understanding the history behind them has made me feel a lot more comfortable in my skin, and also being able to articulate what I'm trying to say rather than just, I feel this is unfair and it's making me angry. And but now it's, how do I use that anger in a proactive manner that can benefit my community?
What is the definition, may I ask, of race, culture, and language? I think this is beautiful how you've made this full circle to be proud of the skin that you are in, and you are blessing the world with it, which I'm so thankful for that you are coming and sharing it with us. How can we apply those three words to be better humans? What is race, culture, and
Yes.
language to you?
Yes. So race is, and again, this is self-education. So I'm not claiming that any of these ideas are my own. This is the work of people who have put a lot of time and research and just their experience into this type of work. But race is the color of our skin. We can be black, brown, white. Culture can fall down into geographical location or rituals. So you can be Latinx from Latin America. And then language is what we speak. So Spanish speakers were Hispanic. You can be a white Latinx who is also Hispanic. So an example would be Mexican. So I'm a white person who grew up in Mexico who speaks Spanish. You can also be a white Latinx who is non-Hispanic. So for example, Brazilians, because they speak Portuguese. But you can also be a white Hispanic who is not Latinx. So, for example, somebody who is from Spain because they speak Spanish, they're white, but they're not from Latin America.
Wow.
And yeah, and what I've seen a lot in our community is a lot of white Latinx folk get offended when they're being called white. And they say, I'm a proud Latin, I'm a proud Latino, I'm a proud this. And I used to be that person. And now, where I'm at right now, it's like you can be white and you can be Latinx and you can be proud, but you can be white Latinx and also be racist because you have that privilege and you benefit from a system that has a lot of, you know, pretty much everything is made for you. And as a white Latinx, we also have the privilege to navigate white spaces and Latinx spaces. So that's how that came about, right? Like how white Latinx folk, we used to, or we do get offended when we get called white, and really putting the research and the work and the education behind understanding why that is. And now I can say I'm a proud white Latina.
I love it.
Who understands that she walks around with a lot of privilege, but also I'm trying to educate myself and not put the emotional labor on my friends or mentors or supervisors on how to understand what that means and also how to leverage that privilege to be better and do better.
That's beautiful. I appreciate you taking the time to unpack and share that with us. That is
It's
such
crazy.
good knowledge.
It's crazy because I just wrote this down and try to make sense of it because I was about to record it and put it on our Instagram account because I was like, I feel like there's a lot of resentment when it comes to being a white Latina. And I don't know if it's going to help anybody, but I'm going to try to unpack this to help make sense of it, at least how it makes sense to me. And it's funny that you asked because now I get to use it.
Yes,
Now I
I
get to
will.
explain it.
I will. Yes, we can use this anywhere you want. Oh, this has been such an enlightening and beautiful conversation. Thank you for opening up and sharing you with us. I always ask the guests one thing that matters, but we want to take it a step further with these special bonus TCA episodes, and they have a slogan. And it says, dare to be the change. The DARE acronym, the D stands for decide, as in decide to make a change. So at what point did you decide to make a change? Either in your work, your research, your life. You talked about a year ago really slowing down and making a change. But when did you decide to dare?
When I left my full time job, I think that was the point where I decided to not be a part of a system that wasn't benefiting our students, specifically our students of color in music. And I think that was the catalyst to really unpack what it meant to be part of the system, how to break away from the system, how to create change, not only within our communities, but also within myself. And that's when I decided to really change my way of thinking in order to, like I said before, be better and do better.
That is beautiful. And the perfect way to end this episode. If people want to follow you on Instagram, what's your Instagram handle?
Yes, it's at Latina Hustle _ Um, I used to have a personal one, but it got super crazy managing two accounts. So now it's a mixture of my business, my sister and my business, but also what we do in everyday life. And we talk about my sister is going back to school. So she's going to community college to get her associate's degree as a full-time mom in her late 20s, married. And then what we do as mom entrepreneurs, as white Latinas, as members of a community that is very tight and is also always looking to help one another.
Oh, that is awesome. I will put that handle in the episode notes along with other things. I'm so thankful to have met you today. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
While recording this episode, there were so many times that I had goosebumps. How exciting is it that we have the opportunity to have these conversations? Thank you so much for being a part of this experience, for listening, for challenging yourself to make the decision to follow those 4 pillars of TCA, of True Change Alliance. That change is necessary, it's consistent, it's challenging, and it has to be something that we all work for all the time. I can't see where we go from here. I can't wait to see where we go from here. I can't see where we're going. But I'm so thankful that you're listening. Remember, you matter. Every single one of you. We all know that music matters. And as we heard from Dr. Galvez, the choir room was her safe space. So music really sincerely matters. And I'll see you next time when we have our next installment of the TCA D.A.R.E series. Thanks for listening.